Probably still the video who I think are the top 10 of head coaches of going into the 2025 college football season. So I've still got Kobe Smart from Georgia at number one because he does have two recent national championship wins. And I think he's the best recruiter in the country. And last season was only a disappointment because of how great of a football program that Kirby Smart has turned Georgia into. To go 11-3 and win the SEC, you've still got to have a really good team. And he's probably the best defensive coach in the country. He's always got a really good defense, and he's an expert at coaching the line of scrimmage. But why Georgia wasn't even better this past season, I think, was because of their run game for the first time in a really long time was actually pretty bad. And I think that was mostly because their offensive line wasn't as good as it had been the 3 years before that. But Kirby Smart is 105-19 in 9 seasons as Georgia's head coach, and 7 out of the 9 seasons he's won 11 plus games, and he's won three SEC championships, and he's coached in the college football playoff 4 times. But the one thing bad about Kirby Smart is he can't seem to beat Alabama. He's 1-6 against them, and he will be tested this coming season with if he should get to stay number one on this list, because Georgia does lose a whole lot this year. They're not going to have near as much production coming back this year as they did the year before. But I do trust Kirby Smart to still find a way to get Georgia into the college football playoff this coming season. So number two is Ryan Day from Ohio State. So Ryan Day proved, I think, without a doubt, that when he won the 12-team playoff, he is one of the best coaches in college football. He has the best winning percentage of all current college football head coaches. He is at 67-10 in 6 seasons as Ohio State's head coach, and he hasn't lost more than 2 games in a season, and he's a really good recruiter and great at player development. And he's made 4 playoff appearances in his time as Ohio State's head coach. The offense has always been good under him, but the defense has improved a lot since he's been there. These past 2 seasons, Ohio State has had an elite defense. And probably the most impressive thing about Ryan Day is what he's able to do with wide receivers. He's had so many great wide receivers that play for him. And I know the most famous ones are probably Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith. And those types of wide receivers are so rare to have. But he will be tested this coming season because Ohio State, this past season got so many players to come back to college so they could win a national championship, with which obviously worked out. But that also means that they're going to lose a lot this coming season. But I do trust Ryan Day to still get Ohio State at least 10 wins and into the college football playoff this coming season. The only bad thing about him has been he can't seem to beat Michigan. Michigan seems to own him, and I know if you're an Ohio State fan, that is frustrating because Michigan's your biggest rival. But if I was an Ohio State fan, I would not want Ryan Day fired. And number three is Dan Lanning from Oregon. So for Dan Lanning to already be on my top three when he's only been a head coach for 3 years really says a lot about how great of a coach he is. He's one of the best recruiters in the country. He's been recruiting better at Oregon than any coach there has ever done. And he's one of the best in the country at player development. The offense has been good every year he's been there, and the defense has improved every year that he's been there, and he's great at coaching the line of scrimmage. But the one thing is, ever since he's been at Oregon, they've always had great quarterback play, and with Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel, this coming season, for the first time since his first season at Oregon, they are questionable at quarterback and probably aren't going to be as good at quarterback as they were in his first 3 seasons. So the question will be, can he still win a lot of games without a great quarterback play? And I think that he can. But without Dylan Gabriel, Oregon would not have won the Big Ten this past season. But Dan Lanning has continued to improve Oregon since he's been there. He went 10-3 in his first season and 12-2 in his second season and 13-1 in his third season. And he won, the Big Ten this past season, which was his first ever conference championship win. And that win and his regular season win over Ohio State were the two biggest wins of his head coaching career. As a head coach, he is at 35 and 6. And number four is Steve Sarkisian from Texas. So I didn't include last year Steve Sarkisian in my top 10 head coaches list, even though I thought he was a top 10 head coach, because even though he had been building up Texas's program, he had only had the one good year anywhere as the head coach. But I think after this past season, it's safe to say that Texas is going to be one of the most dominant programs in college football for a long time under Sarkisian. So he's a perfect example of why you need to give your coach some time. Because his first year there was not very good. They were only 5-7, but then in his second year they improved to 8-5, and then his third year they were at 12-2, and then the fourth year 13-3. So they were about the same these past 2 seasons. And he's been a head coach for 11 seasons. He was at Washington for 5 seasons and USC for a year and a half before getting fired. And at Texas, his record is 38-17, and his overall record as a head coach is 84 and 52. But he's been a great recruiter since he's been at Texas, and he seems to understand the importance of being dominant at the line of scrimmage, and he's been great with his player development. The one problem I think with him is even though he is known for being one of the best offensive play callers in the country, I think he's making a mistake by trying to be the offensive coordinator and the head coach. Because Ryan Day was one of the best offensive play callers too, but he gave that up last year and hired Chip Kelly, who's also really good at that, and that obviously worked out really well. But Texas offense, last season was a little bit of a disappointment, and I think it was held back by him trying to do uh, both of those things. But even though he's known as an offensive expert, he's improved Texas's defense every year that he's been there. And last season, for the first time in at least 15 years, Texas had an elite defense. And number five is Dabo Swinney from Clemson. So I moved Dabo Swinney down 3 spots from where I had him last year. Because even though he's won 2 national championships, I can't just leave him at the top three forever because he's won 2 national championships. And those 2 national championships aren't real recent now, and he's not had a great team in his last 4 seasons. But I am obviously still giving him credit for the national championships by putting him this high. And he's now had 7 appearances in the college football playoff and coached in 4 national championships. And his record in 16 years as Clemson's head coach is 176 and 44, and he's won the ACC more than half of the years he's been there, 9 times, and he's got 13 10 plus win seasons. And Dabo Swinney is one of the best to do it when it comes to recruiting and player development. And this year, he's finally used the transfer portal a little bit, so we'll see if maybe he can get Clemson back to being one of the best programs in college football in the future. But number 6 is Brian Kelly from LSU. So Brian Kelly has not really ever had any elite team in his 34 seasons as a head coach in college football. But I've gotten this high on the list because he's one of the most consistently good coaches. And he's been a head coach at 5 different places and 2 different Power Four schools. His overall record as a head coach is 313 and 108, and his record at Notre Dame was 113 and 40, and at LSU his record is 29 and 11. So Brian Kelly has been in 2 times the college football playoff and has coached in 1 national championship, but he has not ever won a national championship, and he's always struggled in the big games. The 2 best wins that he's ever gotten were probably Alabama in 2022, and then the Ole Miss last year. Because even though Ole Miss was a 3-loss team, they had one of the best rosters in the country, and they were a better team than LSU was, and probably should have won the game. But Brian Kelly outcoached Lane Kiffin by a lot in that game, who I've got right behind him on my list. And Brian Kelly, except for in 2023, has pretty much always had at least a decent defense. Uh, but at Notre Dame, they never really seemed to have a great wide receiver room or even one scary wide receiver. And he never really had a good quarterback, but that has changed since he's been at LSU. He had the Heisman winner quarterback Jaden Daniels, who was drafted number 2, and Garrett Nussmeier is going to be one of college football's top returning quarterbacks this coming season. And last year, he had 2 wide receivers drafted in the first round, and was at least going to have another one highly drafted this year, Kyron Lacy, before he got arrested. But Brian Kelly, I wouldn't give up on him being able to possibly win a national championship. If I was an LSU fan, I'd try to be patient because it's not like he's been bad since he's been at LSU. They've had a pretty good team each year. And number 7 is Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss. So the bad things about Lane Kiffin are he doesn't ever want to kick field goals, and he doesn't seem to realize that those fourth down conversions uh, work a lot less than half the time, and that field goals are very useful playing in the SEC, which is a very defensive conference, and probably cost them a trip to the playoffs this past season. And even with that, though, he made another dumb decision when he had Ulysses Bentley, who was clearly Ole Miss's best running back this past season, sit on the bench for nearly the whole season, and it took injuries to other running backs for him to even get playing time. Like in the Florida game, Ulysses Bentley didn't even play, and Ole Miss lost by a touchdown, and that caused them to miss out on the college football playoff. But if Bentley had played, maybe they would have won that game. But 10-3 in the SEC is still a very good season, and I think Lane Kiffin is a very good coach, and really for me being an Ole Miss fan to be disappointed in a 10-3 season shows how much of a good job he's done with Ole Miss as a program. Because before I would have been thrilled for Ole Miss to get 10 wins, but Lane Kiffin has been a head coach at uh, three other places before Ole Miss. He was at Tennessee and USC and Florida Atlantic, and his overall record is 105 and 52 in 13 years. But at Ole Miss, he's had the two best years in a row that they've ever had. They are at 21 and 5 in the past two seasons, and he's gotten them 10 plus wins in three out of the last four seasons, and he's at 44 and 18 as their head coach. And Lane Kiffin, is known for being an offensive expert, but his defense has improved a lot these past two seasons to where last season Ole Miss for the first time in at least a decade had an elite defense, and this past season when he beat Georgia, that was the biggest win of his coaching career. And as an Ole Miss fan, I don't want to lose Lane Kiffin as a coach because he's the best they've ever had, and he's known as the king of the transfer portal. Even though they haven't used it as much this time, but he's improved Ole Miss's recruiting a lot too since he's been there. And at number 8 is Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame. So Marcus Freeman, I think, is a better coach than Brian Kelly is. Even though I have Kelly ranked ahead of him, that's because even though Marcus Freeman last year had a better team than Brian Kelly has ever had, that was just the one year. And in Marcus Freeman's first 2 years at Notre Dame, they were 9-4 and 10-3, which were like normal Brian Kelly type of seasons. And Brian Kelly has had several teams that won more than 10 games. But Marcus Freeman has improved Notre Dame's defense these past two seasons to being one of the best in the country. And his problem, though, does seem to be a wide receiver, which is was a problem for Brian Kelly too. They still have never had a good wide receiver, and their wide receiver room has really never been above average since he's been there. And it's not really known how good of quarterback developer he is, because other than his first season, Notre Dame has had a transfer quarterback, but he's going to be tested more this coming season because, at least as of right now, he's not brought in a transfer quarterback. And his defensive coordinator, Al Golden, just left for the NFL. And he's also been, a big part of Notre Dame's uh, great defense these past couple of years. But Marcus Freeman is 20 uh 33 and um uh 9 as Notre Dame's head coach. And uh, he's really good at the line of scrimmage. And they've always had a good line game since he's been there. And he's done a nice job at recruiting too, at least as good as Brian Kelly did when he was at Notre Dame. And at number 9 is James Franklin from Penn State. So James Franklin has been a head coach for 14 years, and his overall record is 125 and 57. And he was at Vanderbilt for 3 years before coming to Penn State, where he did something that no one else had done before there and still hasn't ever done before besides him. He got them to 3 bowl games in a row and 2 9-win seasons in a row. And at Penn State, his record is 101 and 42. And 6 of the 11 years that he's been there, he's won 10 or more games. And these past 3 seasons, Penn State has been really good under him. He's at 34 and 8 in that. But there's an obvious ceiling with James Franklin. No matter how good of a team he seems to have, he can never win the big games. He's lost all of the biggest games that he's coached in these past 3 seasons. His biggest wins these past 3 seasons have been against Utah in the Rose Bowl, and then SMU and Boise State in those playoff games this past season. But he's 1-10 against Ohio State, and has lost 8 in a row to them, and hasn't beat them since 2016, which was the only time that he's won the Big Ten championship. And I put him behind Marcus Freeman because James Franklin, just lost to Marcus Freeman and clearly got out coached. And James Franklin, even though he has a lot more experience than Freeman does, he's never had a team as good as Marcus Freeman did this past season. But James Franklin is a very good defensive coach. You're going to have a good defense with him, and he's great at coaching the line of scrimmage. And you're going to have a good run game with him. But the problem with him is that he can't seem to develop his wide receivers. Like with Notre Dame, they never have a scary wide receiver or a above average wide receiver room. And he doesn't seem to be very good at developing quarterbacks either. Because even before Disaster Aller, the quarterbacks at Penn State were average at best. And Disaster Aller, was the top quarterback recruit of 2022, as hard as that would be to believe when you watch him play. Because Disaster Aller in college has looked much more like an average quarterback than a 5-star quarterback. Uh, and at number 10 is Josh Heupel from Tennessee. In Heupel's 4 years as Tennessee's head coach, they are at 37 and 15. And his first season there, they were 7-6, which I know doesn't seem great, but it was still a successful season because they had such low expectations that year. They weren't even expected to make a bowl game. And the 3 years since then, he's 11-2 and 9-4 and 10-3. So they're averaging 10 wins a season. The problem though with him is he's 0-4 against Georgia, and his offense can never hardly do anything against Georgia, which makes me kind of doubt that he's ever going to be able to beat Georgia, and he's probably going to have to do that at some point to ever uh, have a chance to win the SEC. But John Franklin, is known for being an offensive expert, but he's improved their defense every year that he's been there. Tennessee defense was elite last year for the first time in over a decade. And their defensive line was expected to be great, and it didn't disappoint. But what was really impressive was what he did with the secondary, because the magazines were saying that Tennessee's secondary was going to be a problem for them this past season. But not only was it not a problem, they had one of the best secondaries in the country. But I think that it's holding back Tennessee's offense that Heupel is trying to be the offensive coordinator and the head coach like Sarkisian is at Texas. Because if that was all he was doing, I think their offense would be really good. But with him trying to be the head coach too, their offense has been kind of disappointing the past 2 years, especially last year. Their wide receivers were pretty disappointing this past season. But that will be it with this video. And please subscribe. And thanks for watching. And I'll be back soon.